The flickering light of the candles cast long shadows across a cluttered lavatory, filled with the pungent scent of herbs and metals. Dante carefully ground a handful of dried lavender, his focus unbroken despite the late hour. He was used to long nights spent toiling under the watchful eye of his master, the reclusive alchemist Master Alfeo, but tonight the workshop was eerily silent. Dante glanced at the door to Alfeo's private chamber, which had been closed for hours. It wasn't unusual for his master to work late into the night, locked away with his mysterious experiments, but something felt different tonight. There had been no sound of bubbling beakers or the scratching of quills, only an unsettling stillness. Wiping his hands on his apron, Dante approached the chamber door, hesitating before knocking lightly. "Master Alfeo," he called, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer. He pushed the door open slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was empty. Dante's eyes swept over the disarray, scattered books, spilled powders, and an overturned inkwell staining the floor. It was as if Alfeo had left in a great hurry, but the most peculiar sight was on his desk, a half-finished formula written in his master's elegant, precise handwriting, accompanied by a trail of cryptic notes. Dante picked up the parchment, squinting at the alchemical symbols and Latin phrases. The formula was incomplete, ending abruptly as if his master had been interrupted. His eyes caught a phrase written in the margin: "The key lies within the philosopher's chamber." He had heard the term before, a legend among alchemists. The philosopher's chamber was said to be a hidden room where the greatest secrets of alchemy were stored. But it was a myth, a story told to keep apprentices like him chasing shadows. Yet the urgency in the notes suggested otherwise. Dante's hands trembled as he carefully folded the parchment and tucked it into his vest. He glanced around the room one last time before slipping out into the cool night air. The streets of Florence were quiet, the moon casting a silver glow over the rooftops. Dante's mind raced with questions. Where had his master gone? Why leave behind an unfinished formula? And what did the reference to the philosopher's chamber mean? He knew one thing: Master Alfeo wouldn't abandon his work without reason. Something had happened, something urgent, dangerous. Also, Dante was the only one who followed the clues left behind. He set off into the night, unaware that his master's disappearance was just the beginning of a journey that would plunge him into the hidden world of alchemical secrets, ancient rivalries, and a truth far more terrifying than he could imagine. The first light of dawn crept over the city as Dante made his way through the winding streets of Florence. He clutched the crumbled notes in his hand, scanning the familiar symbols and phrases that seemed to taunt him with their incompleteness. He knew his first stop had to be the local apothecary, where Master Alfeo often procured rare ingredients. Perhaps someone there had seen or heard something unusual. The apothecary's store was dimly lit, filled with the scent of herbs and spices. Old Signora, the shopkeeper, looked up from her counter with a raised eyebrow as Dante entered. "Dante," she greeted him, her sharp eyes narrowing. "What brings you here so early?" "I'm looking for Master Alfeo," Dante said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Have you seen him? He left his workshop abruptly last night." Signora's face darkened. "No, I haven't seen him," she replied slowly. "But you're not the first to ask." Dante's pulse quickened. "Who else is looking for him?" "A man," she said, lowering her voice, dressed in dark robes with a strange insignia on his cloak. "He asked about certain rare ingredients: nightshade, mandrake root, and quicksilver." I told him nothing. Dante's stomach dropped. He recognized those ingredients. They were used in the creation of powerful, often forbidden elixirs. His master had been experimenting with similar substances recently, though he had always been secretive about his true intentions. "Thank you, Signora," Dante said, backing toward the door. "If you see him, please let me know." Outside, the city was waking up, but Dante felt a chill run down his spine. Someone else was looking for Master Alfeo, and they knew more than they should. He pulled out the notes again, scanning the symbols for any clue he might have missed. His eyes landed on a small sketch in the corner, an alchemical circle with the initials SG. It took him a moment to place it, but then he remembered. The emblem of the Societas Geminus, a secret society of alchemists known for their ruthless pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Dante's heart raced. The Societas Geminus was notorious, its members willing to go to any lengths to unlock the secrets of immortality. If they were involved, it meant that the master had stumbled into something far greater than Dante had realized. He needed answers, and he knew where to find them. The society's meeting place was rumored to be beneath the old monastery on the outskirts of the city. It was a dangerous place, but it was his only lead. As he turned toward the monastery, a figure watched him from the shadows, eyes glinting in the early morning light. Dante didn't notice, he was too focused on the task ahead, but the watcher followed, silent and unseen. a ghost from Dante's past who had no intention of letting him solve the mystery alone. The sun had barely risen as Dante made his way toward the old monastery on the outskirts of Florence. His mind raced with everything he had learned. If the Societas Geminus was involved, then his master's disappearance was far more than a sudden departure. He could feel the weight of the cryptic notes in his pocket, each word like a puzzle piece he was desperate to fit together. The monastery's stone walls loomed ahead, ivy clinging to the ancient bricks. It had been abandoned for years, its once grand halls, now a refuge for secrets and shadows. Dante pushed open the heavy oak doors, its hinges creaking loudly in the silence. Inside, the air was damp and cold, filled with the scent of dust and decay. He moved cautiously through the dim corridor, his footsteps echoing off the stone. At the far end of the hall, he found a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Dante hesitated, but the image of the emblem, SG, burned in his mind. He had come this far, and he knew he couldn't turn back now. He descended into the underground chamber, the faint glow of torches lighting his way. As he rounded the corner, he was met with a sight that made him stop short. A gathering of hooded figures, their faces hidden in shadow, standing in a circle around the stone altar. The symbol of the Societas Geminus was etched into the floor, a serpent devouring its own tail. Dante pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay out of sight. He could hear the murmur of their voices, speaking in Latin. "Time is near," one of them said. Master Alfeo was close to completing the formula, but the final piece eludes us. A second figure taller than the rest stepped forward. "The Apprentice," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Dante holds the key now. He has the final notes. Find him and bring him here." Dante's blood ran cold. They were after him. He knew he couldn't linger, but he needed more information. He inched closer, straining to hear. "We must be cautious," the figure said. "Master Alfeo's disappearance is no coincidence. He succeeded in creating the elixir." The room felt silent, the tension palpable. Dante's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the truth. His master hadn't vanished. He had become immortal. But why would Alfeo disappear after such a monumental achievement? The answer came like a whisper in the back of his mind. Because the cost was too great. Dante backed away slowly, but his foot slipped on a loose stone, sending it skirting across the floor. Noise echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The hooded figures turned as one, their eyes locking onto him. "There," the tall figure shouted. "The Apprentice! Seize him!" Dante spun on his heel and sprinted out towards the staircase, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear their footsteps behind him, getting closer. He burst through the monastery doors, stumbling into the bright morning light. He had no time to think, only to run. As he fled back toward the city, he knew one thing was for certain. He was no longer searching for his master. His master was searching for him. Dante raced through the streets of Florence, weaving between market stalls and startled pedestrians. He could still feel the eyes of the hooded figures on his back, but when he glanced over his shoulder, there was no one there. They had melted away back into the shadows, but he knew they would not give up so easily. He needed to find a place to think, somewhere safe. He ducked into an alley, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He pulled out the crumbled notes again, scanning the symbols and fragments of the formula. It all made sense now. The rare ingredients, the secrecy, the obsession. Alfeo hadn't been trying to create gold. He had been after something far more elusive, immortality. But the notes were incomplete, and there was one symbol he couldn't decipher. It was an alchemical sigil he had never seen before, a twisted, distorted shape like a broken infinity. He traced the symbol with his finger, trying to recall where he had seen it. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. Dante looked up and felt the blood drain from his face. "Master Alfeo?" he whispered. The man before him was barely recognizable. His face was gaunt, his skin pale, and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, were now wild, flickering with an unnatural light. He looked like a man who had walked out of a nightmare. "Dante," Alfeo said, his voice thin and echoing as if it came from a great distance. "You found the notes. You have the final piece." Dante staggered back, his mind reeling. "Master, what happened to you? What have you done?" Alfeo stepped closer, a tremor in his hands. "I succeeded," he said with a bitter laugh. "I created the elixir. I achieved immortality." Dante shook his head, horrified. "But at what cost? You're not the same." "The price was my sanity," Alfeo spat. "Eternity is a curse, not a gift. I can feel the weight of every second stretching on forever. I need the final piece of the formula, Dante. It's the only way to reverse it, to end this torment." Dante's hand instinctively went to his vest, where the final piece of the formula was tucked away. He realized now why his master had left in such a hurry. He'd been trying to escape the consequences of his own creation. "Please," Alfeo begged, dropping to his knees. "You must help me. Give me the notes. Let me end this." Dante felt a wave of pity wash over him. This was no longer the man he had admired. Alfeo was a shadow of his former self, broken by his own ambition. But he couldn't ignore the danger. If the formula fell into the hands of the Societas Geminus, they would use it to spread their influence, plunging the world into chaos. With a heavy heart, Dante made his decision. Dante looked down at his master, crumbled and pleading at his feet. Master Alfeo's face, once a symbol of wisdom and strength, was now twisted by despair and madness. The air around them felt heavy with the weight of an impossible choice. Dante could hear the distant sounds of Florence waking up, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the murmur of merchants setting up their stalls. It was as if the city itself had held its breath, waiting for his decision. "You don't understand what you're asking," Dante said, his voice hoarse. He pulled the final piece of the formula from his vest, holding it up for his master to see. The parchment was crumbled, the ink smudged, but the sigil of the broken infinity seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was the last piece to completing the elixir, the final ingredient that would either grant salvation or seal a fate worse than death. Alfeo's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through the madness. "Give it to me," he whispered. "I can end this. I can finally find peace." Dante hesitated, the weight of the parchment almost unbearable in his hand. "What if it's a trick?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if the Societas Geminus finds out? They'll take the formula, use it to create an army of immortals. They'll destroy everything we know." Alfeo's expression crumbled, tears spilling down his hollow cheeks. "You have to trust me," he begged. "This is not immortality. It's a prison. I thought I could conquer death, but I've only created an eternal torment. Please, Dante, don't let this be my legacy." The sincerity in Alfeo's voice pierced through Dante's fear. For a moment he saw the man who had taken him as a boy, teaching him the secrets of alchemy, guiding him with a firm but kind hand. The broken figure before him was a product of unchecked ambition, a stark reminder of what happened when the pursuit of knowledge outweighed the wisdom to wield it. Dante knelt down, placing the parchment on the ground between them. "I won't give this to you," he said softly, "but I also won't let anyone else use it. The only way to stop this madness is to destroy it." Alfeo's face twisted into a mask of rage. "You fool," he shouted, lunging for the parchment. But Dante was quicker. He pulled the flask from his belt, uncorking it with a swift motion. The liquid inside was bright and volatile, an alchemical solution designed to dissolve any substance it touched. Without hesitating, he poured it over the parchment. The paper dissolved in seconds, the ink bubbling away into nothing. Alfeo let out a scream, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the valley like the wail of a lost soul. He sank to the ground, clutching his head. "It's over," Dante said, his voice choked with sorrow. "There's no reversing it now." Alfeo looked up at him, his eyes filled with something akin to gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You did what I couldn't." He stumbled back, his form flickering as if it were no longer solid. Dante watched, heart heavy, as his master's body began to fade, dissolving into the air like smoke caught in a breeze. It was as if the curse of immortality was unraveling, the release he had so desperately sought, finally granted. In a moment, Alfeo was gone, leaving only the faint scent of burnt sage and a swirl of dust in the morning light. Dante sank to his knees, staring at the empty spot where his master had vanished. He had saved the world from the elixir's curse, but the victory felt hollow. He had lost a mentor, a friend, and a part of himself he will never get back. As the sun climbed higher, Dante rose slowly, feeling the first warmth of the daylight on his face. He slipped the flask back into his belt and turned toward the city, where life was moving on, blissfully unaware of the catastrophe that had been averted. He knew that he couldn't stay here. The secrets he had uncovered were too dangerous, and the Societas Geminus would not give up their search. But he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known before, a purpose that ran deeper than his apprenticeship. Dante walked away from the alley, disappearing into the crowd. He would leave Florence behind, traveling wherever the winds of fate took him. He would find new masters, learn new secrets, but he would never forget the lesson Alfeo had taught him. The greatest alchemical transformation wasn't the creation of gold or the pursuit of immortality. It was the ability to recognize when enough was enough, to choose wisdom over power. He looked up at the sky, the morning sun bright and clear. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace.